Good morning, students. In our previous video, we had ended with the most prominent of 16 margin buds, and we had talked about where those places are exactly today. Just to sum it up, Vajji and Magad and Koshala and Kuru, Panchala, Gandhar, Avanti, which have been mentioned very frequently, and that is what these as I'm taking the marker, that's where we were. So today we start with the next paragraph, that is, while most of the most Mahajanpads were ruled by kings, some known as Gana or Sang were oligarchies where power was shared by a number of men, often collectively called rajas. Now, oligarchy is a situation whereby five or six or maximum 9 to 10 people hold the whole power structure within any society. It doesn't have one emperor or king or a queen kind of a setup who is all powerful and the whole power would flow from him. Okay, there might be definitely a king as a representative, but then his decision would not be one, and his decision would not be final all the time. He would always be under a system of check and balance by other people, and that would be known as oligarchy. Yeah, that is the system of oligarchy. And if you remember, we in our previous chapter, when we were discussing and studying Indus Valley civilization, we realized that they also have a similar kind of setup where no king or the queen or a single ruler rules through all the sites of Indus Valley uh, civilization, and they definitely also probably have a system or a setup whereby 8 or 9 people were ruling and were responsible for the administrative setup in different parts. Okay, and that's what is also being talked about here. Each Mahajanpada had a capital city which was often fortified. Um, Maintaining these fortified cities as well as providing for incipient armies and bureaucracies required resources. Incipient armies would essentially mean developing armies, the armies which daily they are expanding armies, because as the society, as it is obvious that as the societies are getting more and more complicated, they are getting more and more in an expansion mode. Naturally the requirements are also they also arise and they also expand. The similar kind of setup which might have been prevalent or even effective for that matter uh, probably 15 years ago, it you might find it is not working anymore, and then you have to employ more and more people and you have to expand your departments. That is something which happens even now. So it was not unique to Mahajanpads 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Now, this map, which we are just about to see, this happens to be a very important map. I wish I had a board, and if we were in class, and then I would have really explained it to you. But keep this map, firmly in your memory, because the questions in your board exams would invariably would come from this map. Something or the other would always come from this map, because it always does. Okay, yes. Now coming to the content below it, at Brahmins began composing Sanskrit texts known as Dharmashutras. These laid down the norms for rulers as well as for the other social categories who were ideally expected to be the Kshatriyas. Rulers were advised to collect taxes and tributes from cultivators, traders, and artisans. Now, it is obvious that once the whole society is expanding, then you also need to formulate rules, because now it is not 40 or 50 people, hunters and gatherers living in the villages, or leading a pastoral life or leading a gypsy kind of life where you are most of the time on move. Now we are talking about a structure, a situation whereby hundreds, thousands of people are living in one setup, right? So when hundreds of people are living in one setup or in a settlement, there have to be rules. Rules would need to be formulated, otherwise there would be chaos. Then every man would be doing whatever he wishes, and then there would be anarchy. That system is not going to work. So that's what is there mentioned. Brahmins began composing Sanskrit texts known as the Dharma Sutras. Uh, it's, students, I don't know if you have actually studied anything about Dharma Sutras till now. But you have to understand that Dharma Sutra is essentially talking about in the ancient world, Brahmins used to, because as a society, even our Sanatan society or the society in present day India as it was evolving, then naturally a lot of people were coming, a lot of settlers were coming, a lot of people from different foreign lands had also started and settling in India. So naturally, you need rules, naturally, you need regulations, and all those things are here. Your rules, your duties, your responsibilities, all these things are there in Dharma Sutras. uh, it has in fact Dharma Sutra would have things on the ashram structure, like if you're watching TV serials these days on Doordarshan, it talks about sannyas ashram, and then it talks about ashram, and you know the grihast ashram, and these kind of things. So the rules about, though they are mentioned very much in Rig Veda, right? But then the rules of it, the rules of engagement are there in Dharma Sutras, where they have been really elaborated, and how the social norms should be based on the caste system, which was always there. Because the caste system, though it was based on profession, when Rig Veda mentioned it, it has always been there. And it is and interestingly, it is not just the Dharma Sutra that things stopped. You also must have, though it is not there, I don't think it is there in this paragraph, you have also heard about this very famous book called Manusmriti, right? Our Indian politicians talk about it all the time. But Manusmriti also happens to be a kind of a Dharma Sutra, which again talks about your Varna system, how the rights of man, different rights of women, the responsibilities of men, the responsibilities of women, the responsibilities in different relationships, like responsibility of a son, responsibility of a daughter, the duties of a daughter, all those things, how the king should behave, how the commoners should behave, everything is there in Manusmriti. And students, um, you have to understand that how important Dharma Sutra and Manusmriti is, and it is. You would get an idea that when British started ruling in India, when British came to India, they found India to be an extremely complex society. They understood that a civilization which is as old and as ancient as India, with its cultures and traditions which are thousands of years old, it was extremely complicated for them to understand, and it was extremely complicated for them to rule such a vast geography as India. And that is what they did. They consulted Dharma Sutras, they consulted Manusmriti. Okay, in fact, Manusmriti was translated into English. Okay, it was translated into English. In fact, it was one of the first books to be translated into English, and that is how the British codified the laws for for Hindus. Okay, and during the for the British, Hindus meant not just Hindus, right? Hindus meant Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, all of them. What Manusmriti, when British consulted Dharma Sutras and Manusmriti, they just left out only three categories, or the people of three faiths: the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians. Okay. Otherwise, apart from three, anyone who lived in India, anyone who lived in India, from whichever faith it was, all of them came under the purview of, uh, and they were codified, and the laws were codified under Dharma Sutras and Manusmriti, and everyone apart from these three people of these three faiths had to conform to whatever was there in Manusmriti and Dharma Sutra. In fact, students, I'm sure you would study this in political science as well, that the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955, that is the one which the government of India came with after we achieved independence in 1947, which was codified and which was made law in 1955. Um, Almost everything there has been almost right, a bit of tweaking here and there. It is from what the British did in the Hindu personal laws, and how they had governed India for 190 years. The Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jains, the Sikhs, almost everybody else. Okay, all of that has continued even with our Hindu Marriage Act of 1955. We shall continue tomorrow.